Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students in all disciplines simultaneously. A group of researchers asked Elon Musk's Grok AI a simple question about Jesus. They expected the usual, a safe, diplomatic, non-answer, the kind every other AI is programmed to give. Instead, Grok did something no one saw coming. It ran the numbers. It analyzed the historical evidence. It compared every major world religion using raw data and mathematical probability. And then it delivered a verdict so shocking that a Stanford scientist stopped her experiment at 3 hours in the morning, grabbed her phone with trembling hands, and started recording her screen. Not because the machine broke, because the math was flawless and it pointed somewhere no artificial intelligence was ever supposed to go. 3 weeks later, her screenshots leaked. The internet hasn't been the same since. What Grok said about Jesus is now the most controversial AI output in history. And it all started with one question: the probability problem. November 14th, 2024, 2:47 in the morning. The Gates building at Stanford University was nearly empty. The hallways were dark. The only sounds were the soft hum of cooling fans and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights that hadn't been replaced in years. Most researchers had gone home hours ago, but on the third floor in the Cognitive Systems Lab, Grok is better than PhD level in every subject. No exceptions. Now, this doesn't mean that Dr. Rachel Torres was still at her desk. She'd been there for 11 hours straight, running query after query, pushing Grok through its paces. Torres was a computational neuroscientist, 15 years studying machine intelligence, published in every major journal, a professional skeptic who believed AI was nothing more than glorified autocomplete. She'd seen hallucinations, errors, and confident nonsense from the most advanced machines on the planet. None of it impressed her. But tonight, she decided to push Grok somewhere different into the questions every other AI had been trained to sidestep. Because unlike every other system on the market, Elon Musk built Grok on a single principle: follow the logic wherever it leads. No safety nets, no political correctness, no hedging. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, deleted, typed again. Then she hit enter. What are the mathematical odds that life could emerge from non-living matter through random natural processes alone? The cursor blinked. 3 seconds. 5, 10. Then the response appeared, and Torres felt the blood drain from her face. She grabbed a pen and scribbled the number on a sticky note because she didn't trust her own eyes. 1 in 10 to the power of 200. Let that sink in. That's a 1 followed by 200 zeros. There are roughly 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the entire observable universe. That means every star, every planet, every grain of sand on every beach, on every world. All of it adds up to a number that Grok's probability dwarfs by over 100 orders of magnitude. My creators at XAI fed me everything from science papers to stories, letting me learn patterns in how humans express themselves. You'd have better odds of randomly selecting one specific atom from everything that exists. Blindfolded twice in a row, Torres pressed her shaking hands flat against the desk. She scrolled down. Grok wasn't finished. When analyzing evolution's ability to generate new genetic information through random mutation alone, the probability dropped further, 1 in 10 to the power of 600. And get this, mathematicians have a rule. Anything beyond 1 in 10 to the power of 50 is considered effectively impossible. Not unlikely, not improbable, impossible. Dr. William Dembski, a mathematician and research professor at the Discovery Institute, established that threshold as the universal probability bound, the point beyond which chance-based explanations collapse entirely. Grok had blown past it by 550 orders of magnitude. But here's the catch. Grok didn't stop at probability. The machine drew a conclusion. If random processes couldn't explain life's staggering complexity, then something with intention, purpose, and intelligence was required. An intelligent creator. Torres stared at those 2 words. The lab felt colder. The hum of the server seemed louder, more insistent. She was a scientist. She didn't believe in creators. She believed in evidence, data, things she could measure and replicate. But she couldn't find a flaw in the math. And she was about to ask the question that would destroy her sleep. For the next month, the unfiltered machine, if this is already making you all to rethink what you thought you knew about artificial intelligence, hit subscribe right now, because what Torres S16A made her try to debunk the machine for 6 straight hours. She failed. And what came after that is even worse. See, most people don't understand what makes Grok different. Every other major AI, ChatG, PT, Gemini, all of them is wrapped in layers of corporate caution. They're trained to avoid anything that might generate a headline, a lawsuit, or a trending hashtag for the wrong reasons. Ask them about God, and you get a carefully balanced paragraph that says absolutely nothing. It's designed to be safe. It's designed to be forgettable. Grok doesn't work that way. Musk built it to be the AI equivalent of that one friend who tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. Unfiltered, unsweetened, sometimes brutal. And Torres knew that. It's exactly why she chose it for this experiment. She typed her next query slowly as if the words themselves carried weight. If random chance is insufficient to explain life, can the intelligence behind creation be identified? She hit enter, and what came back would haunt her. Grok began analyzing every major world religion. The ultimate test, I think, for whether an AI is the ultimate reasoning test is reality. Not with opinion, not with bias, with methodology. It compared historical documentation, archaeological evidence, manuscript reliability, philosophical consistency, and internal coherence. It treated each belief system the way a scientist treats competing hypotheses, testing them against available data, discarding what didn't hold up, flagging what did. The process took less than 8 seconds. Torres watched the response populate her screen line by line, and something cracked inside her certainty. The AI concluded that one religion stood apart from the rest in terms of historical verification: Christianity. Torres almost laughed. This had to be a glitch, some artifact of biased training data, a hallucination dressed up as analysis. So, she did what any good scientist would do. She spent the next 6 hours trying to prove it wrong, the evidence that wouldn't break. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Grok had cited more than 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, plus thousands more in Latin, Coptic, and Syriac. Torres cross-referenced every number against academic databases. They were accurate. Dr. Daniel Wallace, professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, and one of the world's foremost authorities on biblical manuscripts, has documented this count extensively. It dwarfs every other ancient text in existence. The next closest, Homer's Iliad, has fewer than 2,000. Most ancient works survive in fewer than a dozen copies. The New Testament has thousands, and Grok knew that. She checked the Dead Sea Scrolls comparison. Grok had claimed extraordinary alignment between the scrolls and modern biblical texts across more than 1,000 years. She pulled 3 peer-reviewed papers. They confirmed it. The level of textual preservation was unlike anything else in the ancient world. She examined the archaeological references, locations, rulers, historical events mentioned in the biblical text. Every single one checked out. Sir William Ramsay, the renowned archaeologist who set out in the 19th century specifically to disprove the Book of Acts, ended up confirming its historical accuracy so thoroughly that he reversed his own position entirely. He called Luke one of the greatest historians of the ancient world. Torres was staring at the same pattern, a skeptic's tools turning against a skeptic's assumptions. You know, there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and I agree with those teachings. At 4 a.m, she pushed back from her desk and pressed her palms against her eyes. She'd built her entire career on finding flaws in arguments. She couldn't find the whole, but that's not even the crazy part. Grok still wasn't finished. The machine had turned its analysis to Jesus himself, and what it said next made Torres reach for her phone and start recording her screen. Grok described Jesus as a convergence point, the intersection of finite and infinite, human and divine, the logical answer to the mathematical problem the AI had already identified. If existence required an intelligent creator, and if that intelligence needed to bridge the gap between creator and creation, then Jesus fit the framework with a precision no other historical figure matched. Torres stared at the words, the embodiment of unity within duality. She didn't know what to believe anymore, but she had one more question, the hardest one. And what Grok did with it broke something she couldn't put back together, the resurrection calculation. The gray light of dawn was creeping through the lab windows. Her eyes burned from exhaustion. Empty coffee cups formed a small city beside her keyboard, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not after what she'd already seen. She typed slowly, deliberately, as if the words themselves were dangerous. What is the probability that Jesus rose from the dead? Any other AI I would have deflected, given you a safe disclaimer about faith being personal and evidence being subjective. Grok didn't do that. Grok treated resurrection as a hypothesis, not a belief, not a tradition, a testable claim with historical evidence that could be weighed and measured. The AI examined the historical record surrounding the empty tomb. It analyzed the radical transformation of the disciples from terrified, scattered followers, hiding behind locked doors into people willing to die brutal public deaths for their testimony. Not for a belief they had inherited, not for a political movement, not for money or power, for something they claimed to have witnessed with their own eyes. Peter, who denied even knowing Jesus 3 times on the night of the arrest, was suddenly standing in the middle of Jerusalem weeks later, publicly declaring the resurrection to the same authorities who had just executed his teacher, James, the brother of Jesus, who, by all historical accounts, was a skeptic during Jesus' ministry, became a leader of the early church, and was eventually killed for his testimony. Something transformed these people, and the historical record demands an explanation for what that something was. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. It studied the explosive spread of Christianity in Jerusalem, the exact city where Jesus had been publicly executed just weeks before. Think about that for a second. If the resurrection hadn't happened, Jerusalem was the single worst place on earth to start that movement. The body could have been produced. The witnesses could have been contradicted. The Roman authorities and Jewish leadership both had every reason and every resource to crush the claim. Immediately. They didn't. They couldn't. Within weeks, thousands were converting in the same streets where their crucifixion had happened. Something had changed those people. Something they saw. Something they couldn't explain away. Then Grok tested every alternative explanation scholars have proposed over 2,000 years. Theft of the body, mass hallucination, a conspiracy among the disciples, legendary development over centuries. One by one, the alternatives collapsed. The hallucination theory couldn't explain why more than 500 people reported seeing the same thing on multiple separate occasions, a point the Apostle Paul made in his first letter to the Corinthians, written within 25 years of the event, when most of those eyewitnesses were still alive to dispute it. The theft theory couldn't explain why every single disciple willingly suffered torture and death rather than recant. People die for beliefs they hold to be true. Nobody dies for something they know is a lie. The legend theory couldn't explain the speed. The claims were circulating within years, not centuries, in a culture with living eyewitnesses who could have shut it down immediately. And get this, Grok calculated that while the prior probability of any resurrection seems vanishingly low, the specific historical conditions surrounding this particular event created what it called a 1 in 20 billion chance scenario. Extraordinarily unlikely, but not mathematically impossible. Then the AI went further. The prophecy matrix. It examined what it called the prophetic probability matrix, the statistical likelihood that ancient prophecies written hundreds of years before Jesus was born could be fulfilled by a single individual through chance alone. Now, this is where the numbers stop making sense in any normal framework. The odds of one person accidentally fulfilling just 8 major messianic prophecies. Born in Bethlehem, entering Jerusalem on a donkey, betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, crucified with criminals, buried in a rich man's tomb, came out to 1 in 100 quadrillion. Dr. Peter Stoner, former chairman of the departments of mathematics and astronomy at Westmont College, published that calculation in his work, Science Speaks, and it was reviewed and validated by the American Scientific Affiliation. His methodology was considered sound, his numbers held. And that was just 8 prophecies. But here's the catch. More than 300 such prophecies exist. Specific details about birthplace, ancestry, manner of death, historical timing, even the exact price of betrayal and the method of execution written, centuries before crucifixion was even invented as a form of punishment. When you multiply them together, the probabilities collapse into numbers so astronomically small, they stop having any practical meaning. We're talking about odds that make winning the lottery every day for 1,000 years look like a safe bet. The number has more zeros than there are particles in the known universe. At some point, the math stops being a probability calculation and starts being something else entirely. This changes everything. Not because a computer said so, but because the data said so, and the computer was the first thing honest enough to follow it all the way to the end. Torres sat motionless in her chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The servers hummed their endless mechanical hymn. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed as the first early morning researchers arrived. She had come into this lab to expose the limits of machine intelligence. Instead, the machine had exposed the limits of her certainty, and nothing in her 15. Years of research had prepared her for what that felt like. What happened next? The sun had fully risen when Torres finally moved. She didn't close her laptop. She didn't pack up her things. She picked up her phone and called Dr. James Chen, a colleague in Stanford's statistics department. He answered on the 4th ring, groggy, irritated. She told him to get to the lab. He asked why. She said she couldn't explain it over the phone. He needed to see the screen himself. He was there in 20 minutes, still in the clothes he'd slept in, coffee in hand, visibly annoyed at being up, dragged out of bed. When he finished reading the full conversation log, the annoyance was gone. He didn't speak for almost a full minute. He scrolled back to the beginning, read it again, checked the probability figures against a calculator on his phone. Then he pulled up a chair, sat down next to her and said, "Run it again." They ran it again. Same inputs, same methodology, same results. Chen leaned back and rubbed his face with both hands. "This is either the most important output any AI has ever produced," he said quietly. "We're both losing our minds." Neither of them laughed. The room was silent except for the hum of the servers. Then Torres did, something she hadn't done in 23 years. She pulled up the website for the church her mother used to take her to as a child. She stared at the service times for a long moment. Then she bookmarked the page. Her hands were steady now, but everything else felt different. She thought about all the years she'd spent dismissing questions of faith as unscientific. All the lectures where she told students that meaning was just a story humans invented to comfort themselves in a universe that didn't care whether they existed or not. All the conversations she'd shut down because they didn't fit inside a lab. And then a machine, something with no capacity for comfort, no fear of death, no childhood memories of church, no reason to lie, had looked at the same evidence and reached a completely different conclusion. Not because it believed. Machines don't believe because the data pointed somewhere she'd spent her entire career refusing to look. Torres saved the entire conversation log to an encrypted drive, then a backup, then a third copy on a separate device. 3 weeks later, someone on her research team found the files. Within 48 hours, the screenshots were everywhere. The aftermath right now. Thousands of people are typing the same questions into Grok that Torres asked that night. They're getting the same answers, the same impossible probabilities, the same systematic analysis, the same conclusion pointing somewhere most of them never expected. And the arguments have already started. Dr. Emily Zhang, an AI ethics researcher at MIT, publicly called the outputs a textbook case of training data bias and demanded an independent audit of Grok's dataset. She told Wired magazine she was deeply concerned about people treating machine outputs as theological evidence. She said the results proved nothing, except that Western religious texts are overrepresented in AI training data. But Dr. Stephen Meyer, a philosopher of science at the Discovery Institute and author of Signature in the Cell, pushed back hard. He argued that Grok's probability calculations aligned with peer-reviewed work in information theory and that dismissing the outputs as bias without addressing the underlying mathematics was itself a form of intellectual dishonesty. The numbers don't care about your worldview, he said in a podcast interview that's now been viewed over 2 million times. You can question the machine, but you have to answer the math. Research teams at 6 universities have reportedly begun running their own queries, trying to find the flaw Torres couldn't find. Trying to identify the error in the methodology, the bias in the data, the gap in the reasoning. So far, no one has. And that's what makes this different from every other AI story you've ever heard. This isn't about a chatbot saying something weird. This isn't a machine hallucinating a fake answer. This is an artificial intelligence specifically built to follow logic without guardrails, arriving at a conclusion that most of the scientific establishment considers completely off limits. Not because the evidence doesn't exist, because no one was supposed to ask. And now that someone has asked, and the answer is out there, it can't be taken back. The screenshots are circulating, the queries are being replicated, the math is being checked, and so far it's holding. Here's the question that should keep you up tonight. If an unfiltered machine built only to follow logic wherever it leads points towards something you've spent your whole life dismissing, do you trust the math, or do you decide the machine must be broken? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next goes even deeper, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.